Chapter 13, Interpersonal Group and Workplace Conflict. The objectives in this chapter are to define interpersonal conflict and name and describe the 4 principles of conflict. We're going to describe the stages of conflict resolution, successful conflict resolution, and then I hope to go into a little bit more detail in describing the 5 conflict resolution styles and then some examples of what would be appropriate use of each of those. Interpersonal conflict, whether it's with one other person or with several other people, occurs when those people are interdependent. That means you're counting on the other person for something, or they are depending on you for something, be it large or small. You perceive their goals to be incompatible with yours, or you see the other person's blocking your goals. Now, conflict, that word, what connotation does that have for you? Thinking back to chapter 5 and how words could have emotional meaning to different people. What is the connotation that that word conflict has? Is it positive? Is it negative? Well, here are some myths about conflict. A lot of times the connotation of the word conflict to us as individuals is, oh, conflict's bad. Yeah, we sometimes say, oh, conflict, that's to be avoided. Some words we think of along with conflict a lot of times off the top of our heads is anger, fighting, mean, bad. And these are just myths. Conflict is always bad. It's always to be avoided. That conflict can damage relationships, or does invariably damage relationships. This is a myth. And another myth is that conflict is a sign of a bad relationship. We're going to look at why conflict can actually be a good thing. A lot of times it is. Now, the first principle when we're thinking about conflict is that it can center on content or relationship issues. Content conflicts are external to the people involved. It might be, I might say to my husband, I'd rather watch this movie, and he'd rather watch this movie, so we might have a difference in opinion there. And that's something external to both of us. On the other hand, relationship conflicts are based on that relationship, how those people interact together. Just for instance, if anyone has a sibling, maybe you know how this goes. If you're the older sibling, have you ever pulled that on your younger sibling? Hey, I'm the older one, so I'm the one who calls the shots. Or maybe you've had an older sibling do that to you. Or maybe conversely, I'm the baby, so you have to cater to me. So you can have, actually, you can have content conflicts that you don't realize on the surface that they might be relationship conflicts as well. Let's say, for instance, my husband and I have a difference in what movie we want to see this weekend. Well, I might say I want one movie. He says a different one. I might be thinking, well, he's the one who takes the money out of his wallet to pay for it. So he thinks he gets to tell me, just because he's the one that's carrying the cash. Well, relationship. So it can come into it. The relationship between the people can be involved in a conflict. Another principle number 2, is that conflict can be negative or positive. And the real problems with conflict come up with the approach taken to the conflict and how it's dealt with by both parties. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about. Conflict can actually be a good thing. It all depends on how it's handled by both people. There are certainly some negatives that can come out of conflict. If you're calling each other names, that's not easily forgotten after the conflict is over. So those, going back to the principle of communication from chapter 1, that communication is irreversible. Once you've called someone a name, it's out there. Maybe hard to get over that. Time wasted that could have been productive, possibly. And, people sometimes have a fear of showing weaknesses. I can't think of an example offhand of this, but sometimes if something matters to someone, if someone if something matters to someone, they don't always want it exposed. They feel vulnerable in exposing something that they feel strongly about. So sometimes they're hesitant to bring up issues because of this. There's certainly some definite positives of conflict, and I want to emphasize these. It really forces us to examine problems. If we're upset about something, or we don't agree with our friend or our partner or someone about something, it can influence the whole relationship for the worse. And so bringing it up and dealing with it can really expose some weak points in a relationship that can actually be strengthened by looking at the issues. Increases understanding of the other person, and it gets it off your chest to prevent a major blow up. When I don't know if you could relate to this, but I can, because sometimes we'll do what we call gunny sacking. Gunny sacking is little grievances that you don't think they're worth bringing up, so you just kind of throw them into your gunny sack, and then all of a sudden you just have a major blow up and say, "You never do this for me," and then the other person's like, "Wait, I didn't know this was a problem," So you kind of this prevents bringing these things up, smaller things as they come up, and dealing with them can get it off your chest and prevent a much bigger blow up later on. Principle 3 is that conflict always takes place in a context. Once again, going back to chapter 1, communication always takes place in contexts. And let's consider conflict when we look at these different contexts. Now, there's the physical context. Is it a public or a private situation? Here's a question for you. You're having a argument with your boyfriend or girlfriend. You really need to bring something up. Would you want to do it in a public or a private space? The second context that would definitely have an impact on the conflict is the social psychological, the atmosphere. Well, certainly social psychological has to do with the relationships between people. I mean, for instance, you would probably deal with a conflict with me as your instructor differently than you would deal with a conflict with your little sister. And, depending who the person is, that might dictate how you deal with the issue. Also, social psychological has to do with the atmosphere and mood at the moment. If you're upset about something, would you want to bring it up when the other person has gotten home from a 13-hour workday? Or would you want to save it until a leisurely Saturday when you can both talk about it without having emotions maybe come into the mix? And that goes along with temporal, too. The timing of a conflict has a lot to do with how it's going to be dealt with and how it'll turn out. Oh, and cultural. Cultural is a big one because different cultures deal with conflict in different ways. The easiest way to look at culture, of course, is with countries. Here's an example. In a collectivist culture such as Japan, their culture, the way they've been raised to deal with conflict, is more in terms of compromise. In the Japanese culture, people are expected to give and take more than in, say, an individualist culture such as the US. We tend to think of conflict more in terms of someone's got to win and someone's got to lose. Principle 4 is that conflict styles have consequences. Now, here are the 5 styles of conflict, and let's look at each one of these and I'll expand a little bit on them. The first style of conflict resolution is called the competing style. This is basically, you could describe it as the it's all about me style. This is the someone wins and someone loses style. There's a right way and a wrong way, competing. This is sometimes appropriate. It might particularly be appropriate if an agreement has been made on how you're going to deal with a situation beforehand between the two of you. The second type of conflict style, and these are in no particular order, is, believe it or not, avoiding is definitely a style of conflict resolution. And there are lots of reasons, several reasons, that you might want to avoid the conflict, and it might be totally justifiable. One reason might be you're really angry and you know that if you bring it up now, you're going to say something you'll be sorry for. Maybe you should temporarily avoid this issue. Another reason you might want to avoid it is maybe bringing this up will just open a big can of worms, as some people would say. Maybe it's not worth bringing up. Maybe it would bring up a lot of other issues that aren't worth dealing with, so I can overlook this, that kind of thing. Those are just a couple examples. The accommodating style, we've all been in this situation. You know, this isn't something that matters that much to me, but it matters to the other person, so I'll just accommodate them. It's not a big deal. Collaborating. Now, this is considered the ideal style of resolving a conflict. Both people walk away feeling like they won. Now, do you think this takes time? Yes. And sometimes you can only get as far as compromising. And compromising is each party gives in, gets something, has to give something up. You know, it's a little bit, I win and lose, you win and lose. Sometimes we compromise, we come to some compromising decisions with a person we're having a conflict with, and then sometimes we agree, well, let's revisit this and maybe we can work this out better in the future. Collaboration is considered the ideal, and really, if it's an important relationship and one that we value, we'll try really hard to achieve that collaboration. The stages in conflict management are really quite similar to the problem-solving stages that we talked about when we were discussing small groups, small teams. And these 5 steps in conflict, resolving a conflict, are quite similar to what the textbook has. I will, or maybe exactly like it. I'm going to give you a little story, tell you a little story, a little made-up story, to give you an example of how each of these steps might play out in real life. Now, this story is made up. It's not based on my real life, but I will tell it in the first person to make it more realistic. So let's say my husband is stopping at the bar 4 nights a week to have a drink or two with his buddies after work. And I'm not real happy about this because I've got dinner waiting for him, and I'm not ever quite sure what time he's going to get home or even what 4 nights he's going to be stopping at the bar. So that's a problem. So we sit down, number 1, define the problem. And because both of us value the relationship, we sit down and we he recognizes that I'm not happy about this. So we define the problem. And the problem is that he's not coming home. I'm upset. He's not coming home to eat my dinner. That's the problem. And he respects that because he values the relationship. Now, number two, we have to establish some kind of criteria. What will a productive solution look like? So I might start the conversation by saying, well, I think that I want to know what your schedule is, and I really think 4 nights is too many nights to be stopping at the bar. And he says, well, I really need my relaxation time, so I need to have some nights when I can stop with my buddies. So that's the criteria. He wants some relaxation time, and I want some time with him at home. Number three, we identify possible solutions. Now, this is going to include some discussion. I might bring up the fact that I might say, is it possible would 1 night a week satisfy your need to relax? I mean, you could tell me what night of the week you're going to do this and plan for it. He says, no. He might say, I go now 4 nights a week, honey. I'm used to that, and maybe I can give up 1 night. So we might be back and forth on this a little bit. And then number four, we finally agree to some kind of a solution that will make both of us, that will satisfy each of us. And let's just say we've come to the conclusion that 2 nights a week, he's going to try 2 nights a week, and he's going to let me know at the beginning of the week which nights those will be. And then finally, we test out the solution. And so maybe we'd go for 2-3 weeks, see how that works out. And if it works out, great. If we're both still happy, maybe sit down and say, is this satisfactory? If it isn't, it's back to the drawing board to see what we can do. But it's important that both parties want to remedy the situation, because if only one party is interested in fixing this, it's never going to be resolved. Now, in workplace or formal settings, it's really important to maintain dignity of the other people. Listen with empathy, seek common ground, emphasize the things you have in common with the other person, and value their viewpoint and your differences. Each one of these is very important, especially in a professional setting. Remember that the aim of interpersonal conflict is not to win and have your opponent lose. It's to resolve a problem and to strengthen the relationship, which it has the power to do, whether between two people or in a group.